Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of It Takes a Viking, the official podcast of the Salem State University Alumni Association. Today's guest we're very excited to have our very own Dr. Nate Bryant, who is now the interim president at North Shore Community College. Nate, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike, good to see you again, and thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. We're looking forward to talking with you. So let's get right into things, Nate. Tell me a little bit about, so let's go back a little bit. You're a double graduate of the university. Tell those folks that are listening and watching along how you ended up at Salem State to begin with.
Well, I'm going to try to give you the Cliff's Notes version. It's a long story and a lot of I've been fortunate, put it that way. I actually, out of high school, I went to a school in Virginia, Norfolk State University in Virginia, on a basketball scholarship. And to make a long story short, it worked out fine athletically, but academically, it just wasn't the greatest fit. Not that I did anything wrong. It just was, it was almost like a factory back then, quite frankly, for athletes, to be totally honest with you. And so my parents convinced me that, if you're going to do something after you graduate, you might want to think about going somewhere else to get your education. So I didn't want to go back home to Connecticut, where I grew up. And so at the time, Tom Thibodeau, who's a Salem State alum, was an assistant coach at Salem State, a friend of the family, knew I was looking to transfer from talking to family members. And so he reached out to me and said, hey, I know you're looking to transfer and I know you don't want to go back home. Why don't you come take a look at Salem State? And so, one thing led to another, came to take a visit at Salem State. It was not too far from home, not too close. I live in Connecticut, so it was like 2 hours and 15 minutes away. And so I decided, you know what, I don't want to go back home. And so I'll enroll at Salem State. And so that's kind of how I ended up at Salem State.
Okay. And so we know you've got your undergraduate and your graduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk a little bit about, you finished your undergraduate degree. What did your next move look like then for you afterwards?
It's funny. So I kind of found everything. I've been very fortunate. So I fell into my job because no one out of high school who goes to college and graduates from college says I want to be an admissions counselor. I mean, I didn't even know what it was, quite frankly, in high school. And so I graduated from. So while I was at Salem State as an undergrad in my senior year, again being very fortunate, the director of admissions was a huge basketball fan. And I was active on campus. I was a member of the African American Student Association and some other programming. So I was pretty active. And so he had seen me at some events. And so he had reached out to me in my senior year during the basketball season and said, hey, there's a opportunity in the admissions office. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And I didn't know who he was. So I said, yeah. I'm a college senior. So I'm like, who is this guy? So I kind of blew him off, to be honest with you. And then maybe, I don't know, a week or so later after another game, he came up to me and said, hey, I wanted you to reach out to me. I have an opportunity for you. And so I said, oh, yeah, okay. And then someone said, hey, that is, he's the director of admissions. You should probably, follow up on that. So I followed up, and again, make a long story short, someone who was an admissions counselor was going out on maternity leave for 6 months, and they were looking for someone to fill that bill for 6 months. And he said, I've seen you speak at some events and I've watched you and you handle yourself pretty well and you articulate all of that stuff. And so we'd love to give you the position for 6 months. So I said, sure, I'll take it. I didn't have, I was a senior in college, wasn't really studying the whole career services process. So it kind of fell in my lap. So again, being fortunate, at about the 4-month mark, he came to me and said, well, the person loves being a mother so much, she doesn't want to come back. So it's yours if you want it. So when I say I fell into admissions, I fell into admissions. So I said, sure, I'll take it. And so I was in admissions for 20 years, moved up the chain, working hard. And so that's kind of how I fell into the field of admissions, quite frankly.
Okay. And so now, and obviously we know that, over the 20 years of working in admissions, you have since grown and moved on at the university as well. So after you left the Department of Admissions, talk a little bit about what some of your roles have been at the university now, and then ultimately what led to your interest in your current position that you hold today.
Sure. So I was in admissions for 20 years, as you just mentioned. And it was great. I loved the opportunity to meet with potential students and guidance counselors and transfer counselors. And I, traveled to high schools and things like that. The one thing that it didn't afford me was the opportunity to work with present students, because our job at admissions is all about bringing in new students. And then once you bring in new students, it's time to go out and bring in new students for the following semester. So I never really had a chance to work with present students or be involved with present students. And so, I think after like the 17th, 18th year, I said, this has been great, but I really want to experience the opportunity of working with our current students. And so I went to my boss at the time, who was Dr. Stanley Cahill, and I said to him, I'm looking for a change. I want to say at Salem State, it's been very good to me, but I'm looking to do something where I can interact with students. And he said, well, okay, there's really nothing I have at this particular point in time, but I'll make sure I keep you in mind if something should come up. And again, being fortunate, Pat Meservey comes in as president, Nancy Harrington retires, and Pat had an idea of taking a lot of the academic support services and putting them all together into one area. And back then it was called Student Academic Support Services. And so she approached me with Stan and said, we'd love you to run this area. And it's an opportunity to work with students and provide support. And where I was looking for the change, I said, perfect, I'll do it. And so I left admissions and I became the assistant dean. Then it was called Student Academic Support Services. It's now known as the Center for Academic Excellence. So I started doing that for about 6 or 7 years. And again, loved what I was doing, helping students, work through issues of advising and tutoring. So again, great experience. Got to meet people all throughout the campus. And the one thing about Salem State is, this is that students, you can pick up the phone. If you have an issue with a student, people are more than willing to help. So I had a great time doing that. Excuse me. Did that for, that's 7 years? 7 years. And then John Keenan becomes the president. Again, I'm doing my thing. I knew President Keenan from my time when he was a state rep. I was a school committee member. We knew each other. We weren't the best of friends, but we knew each other. Sometimes you'd be in the same circles in terms of events in the city of Salem. And so he becomes president, and he reaches out to me, wants to meet with, actually, funny story. I come back from vacation, and the first thing I get a note at the front desk in the Center for Academic Excellence saying, hey, President-elect Keenan, he wasn't the president yet, wants to meet with you. The first thing I'm thinking is, okay, what did I do wrong? And so my boss then was David Silva, the provost. So I said, well, I have a meeting with the provost, and then I'll try to catch up with the president later. And so I go to meet with the provost, and when I get to the provost's office, he says, hey, President-elect Keenan wants to meet with you. So I'm really nervous. So I'm like, what can it possibly be? And he says, the provost says, he wants to meet you back in your office now, so why don't you go and see him? So I'm kind of, I'm not afraid. I didn't do anything wrong, but I'm just curious, why does this guy want to see me? He wants to see me now. So I go back to my office, and that's when he said, hey, I'd like you to be my chief of staff. And my first response was, what does the chief of staff do? I had no idea. He said, well, and this was his words. He said, I've never been a president before. You've never been a chief of staff before. We'll figure it out together. And so, I had to think about it, and went back, talked to my wife, and I thought it was a great opportunity because you make a bigger impact, I think, across the campus. I think I've made impacts, but usually they were with specific departments. But as a chief of staff or senior leadership, you're looking at the entire campus. So I said, sure, let's do it. And so I did that for 3 years. Things were great. And then this opportunity opened up at North Shore Community College. And my number one fan was the president, John Keenan, who, once he knew that Pat Gentile from North Shore, excuse me, once he knew Pat was retiring, he reached out to me and said, they're looking for an interim. You should apply for that job. Mike, I had no desires, no aspirations to be a president, never even was on my radar. I kind of laughed it off, like, yeah. And he goes, oh, I'm serious. You should think about applying for the interim position. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And again, just didn't pay much attention to it. He said, I'm going to reach out to the board, the trustee, the chairman of the board of trustees at North Shore, because I know he's looking to interview some folks. I said, I think you should, reach out to him. So I said, what the heck? It couldn't hurt. So I reached out to him. We had a conversation. And the more I thought about it, Mike, and the more I thought about my experiences at Salem State, the more I said to myself, I think I can do this. Not that I had any doubt, but I wasn't thinking about it. But the more you're having conversations with him, this was the chair of the board at North Shore, and the more I look at kind of my portfolio of work, I said, I think I can do this. So I applied for the interim position, and lo and behold, I got it.
And I think that for those folks that are listening or watching along, it's no surprise that you were chosen for it. I mean, you've been such an advocate for public education that this just seemed like a logical next step for many of us. To when the announcement came out, we went, yeah, like why wouldn't they take Nate? I mean, he's amazing. So
Well, you're too kind.
no, no. So I think for all of us who know you, it was certainly a no-brainer, and it's been well deserved as a lifelong advocate for public education. For those, who may not be too familiar, a lot of people don't realize that North Shore Community College specifically is a tremendous feeder for Salem State when it comes to transfer students and help bridging that gap for maybe the student who goes to North Shore at first because they're not sure what they want to do after high school or later on in life, and it gives them an affordable option to figure out what those next steps are, and then to have the local regional university neighbor in Salem State. I mean, there's a very easy bridge that's been built there for many years.
Absolutely. And I mean, you kind of hit it right on the head. One of the reasons why I decided to go, because again, I wasn't looking to be a president. But when I looked at North Shore's relationship with Salem State, and again, in my body of work, and I had been involved with we created this, it's called the Seamless Pathways Partnership. And what it is a strengthening of the relationship between North Shore and Salem State. And so when this concept emerged, John tapped me to lead it from the Salem State end. And so we were, over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years, we were working with, so a group at Salem State was working with a group at North Shore on this Pathways Partnership, identifying areas where we could partner and make the transition from North Shore to Salem as seamless as possible. And so, I was involved in that. So I got to learn more about North Shore and some of the things that we did. And to your point, it's a feeder school. It's always been a number one feeder transfer institution. So I was familiar with it, not, intimately familiar, but I was familiar nonetheless. So again, when the opportunity came up, just thinking about the relationship I already had with them, my work with the Seamless Pathways Partnership, and still wanting to be connected to Salem State, it was a no-brainer.
And so as you think about your time in higher ed now, I mean, you've been in the game for a little bit. If you could think back and say that the director of admissions never got a hold of you on campus and said, hey, I think you should consider this. If there was another path you would want to pursue or thought about pursuing, what would it have been, do you think?
It's a good question. It probably would have been something in the area of like youth programs. Like I could see myself working for like a Boys and Girls Club or a YM or YWCA, some type of organization that does programming with youth. I just think that's an area that I think I've always gravitated towards. And one of the reasons why, while the admissions job fell in my lap, I could have had opportunities to move out of it entirely and maybe go elsewhere, but I just like the idea of providing support and helping students kind of achieve their goals. So it would have been something in that kind of youth organization type environment.
And so I think in that same vein, as we talk about, your career and your time in higher education and how that kind of opportunity was presented to you as an unsuspecting student, more or less, if you could give any kind of advice to a graduating senior this year about the future or pursuing, your next steps, what do you think it would be?
So the first thing I tell this to people all the time is you never know, wherever you are, you never know if someone's watching you. And I mean, from a good sense. So, I always say, try to be present, be respectful, because there's someone that you're going to come in contact with who's in a position of power, who may be looking for the next Mike Mitchell, but you don't know it because you're a college senior and, life is great. And that's my story. I mean, David Sartwell was the director of admissions. He saw something in me by kind of following my career at Salem State and said, this is a person who I think would be a good fit to be an admissions director. So I always tell people, life is an interview. I mean, everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, they're sizing you up. You don't think about that, but I would argue that more times than not, when a person gets tapped for a position, it's based on an encounter they had with someone who said, "Hey, you're looking for someone? I think Mike Mitchell. I know a guy named Mike Mitchell. I worked with him at X, Y, and Z. Or I talked to him at this thing, and I think he'd be really good for your job or the position." So, I would say to people, just be thinking that you're always, life is one interview. Everyone's kind of jockeying for position, and so always be present, always be respectful, be articulate, because you may find that there's a person that you're talking to who 3, 4, 5 years down the line, or 3, 4, 5 months down the line, may be coming back to you saying, "Hey, I've got a position I'd like you to apply for."
Okay. And I think that's generally good advice for anybody, not just college seniors for
Good
sure,
point.
but
Good point.
especially applicable now. Um, yeah, you just never know what could be out there waiting for you, but you always got to make sure you make the right impressions on people. So let's go back a little bit to your time as a student at the university. And so, I think it's interesting because there's always this photo that seems to pop up every once in a while, and you're going to probably know which one I'm talking about in a second. But because you mentioned Tom Thibodeau earlier, there's a great picture from you as a player on the men's basketball team with you and Tom when he was coaching, and Paul Biancardi and Dave Fazio and Larry Riley. And, I think to look at that photograph and realize the the breadth and the kind of the reach that photo has had, um, in addition to just the local impact on campus, but there were 4 or 5 folks in that picture who all went on to do amazing things. And it was just so funny that they were all centrally located at Salem at that one time. And so,
Yeah.
30 years later, as you look at that picture and you've seen how you've all grown and improved and achieved professionally, what does that photo mean to you?
Yeah, it's funny because at the time, you know, what kid, and I'm going to use the word kid, what kid at the age of 19, 20, 21, 22 are thinking about where they're going to be 30 years from now? Very few. And so, it's back then. It's just a picture. It's a nice picture, and it gives you a sense of pride because you're a captain with your coaches. So I mean, in that regard, it meant a lot back then because it's basically saying you're a captain, so the people have faith in you. But then when you look back, and by the way, other than Larry Riley, who I know, I think he moved south, so we don't really communicate. I communicate with all of them, which says a lot, because we're talking about the early '80s, and so to still have a good, and not just hey, how you doing, but really good relationships with Tibbs, with Paul, and with Fazio, says a lot about the relationship we had way back then. So I mean, it's a sense of pride knowing that, and this is true. I say this all the time too. Being a part of a team, whether it's athletics or whether it's some student group or activity, you learn so much about teamwork and sacrifice and friendship and loyalty. That stuff, I strongly believe, uh, makes a big difference in where you end up in life, because you learn so, and again, you're not thinking about it back then because you're just too young and naive, but the values, and I said the number one value, I think, if someone said, what do you think where are you best at? What do you do best? I think I'm a team player. I don't want to I don't try to take all the credit. When I'm looking to make a decision, I ask for input from others. And that's because I was on a team of folks who in order to achieve a goal, you have to work together. You all have to have the same goal. And so I look at that and say, I'm not surprised that, we've had a modicum of success, however you want to measure that. I'm not surprised because we were really all rooting for each other to genuinely win back then. And then because we've stayed in touch, we really root for each other to genuinely win. I'm putting "win" in quotes now. So it gives you a sense of pride that we all kind of went through this thing together, and we've come out the end in pretty good shape and remain very good friends.
And I think that's such a great thing to remember and to still maintain to this day, is that while you've all gone in fairly different directions, that it all started for you back on the campus, 30 years
Absolutely.
ago. And so thinking of that time now over the last 30 years that you've been not only a graduate, but an intricate member of the community itself, a double graduate, I should say. What does the relationship to Salem State mean to you? What does it mean to you to be a double graduate and a member of our alumni community?
Yeah, so the first word I think that comes to mind is pride, a sense of pride, um, that I am. So the one thing I really like about Salem State is, and this may be, I'm sure that I'm not, this is not unique, but Salem State does a really good job, I think, of linking the past to the present. And what I mean by that is, wherever I go in New England, invariably, I'm going to meet someone who has some relationship with Salem State. And then they'll start talking about their time, and waxing poetically about how they met their spouse, which I did, by the way, or they'll mention a coach or a faculty member. They'll mention someone who had an impact on their life. And then it's like this whole 6 degrees of separation. So they'll say a name, and then I may know that name, or if I don't know that name, I've heard of that name, and then they'll mention someone else, and then invariably a connection is made. And so it's like, what it is like, it's people helping folks along the way. So whether you graduated 60 years ago, someone helped you, that person who helped you was helped by someone else. And then it just builds on top of it. It builds on top of each other, so that by the time it gets to me or someone who's just recently graduating, there's been this connection. So it gives me a sense of pride that people at Salem State, again, we're not unique, but I can only speak to Salem State. The genuineness in trying to help people succeed is very impressive. And so I just take a lot of pride in knowing that I graduated from an institution where people appreciate the hard work that you do. They appreciate the circumstances in life that got you to where you want to be, whatever your circumstances are. And they appreciate the fact that you are kind of paving the way or paying it forward, I would say, for others to come after you. So I take a lot of, pride is the word that comes to mind right away.
And I think that that's something that we've learned in the work that we do now, is that that's a common theme with a lot of folks. And so, Nate, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, and nice to talk with you again. I wish you the continued best of successes in your role at North Shore. And I know obviously we'll stay in touch. You're welcome to come back on the show anytime.
Thanks.
But until next time, that's been another episode of It Takes a Viking with Dr. Nate Bryant, Interim President of North Shore Community College. My name is Mike Mitchell, Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Salem State University. And until next time, thanks for watching.